Today, we're tackling something, well, fundamental. How we actually think, how we make decisions.
Yeah, and you, our listener, have given us a really fascinating mix of sources. Stuff on biases, intuition, even well-being. It's quite a spread.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to pull out the absolute core insights from all this.
Think of it like a shortcut. We want to get you to the heart of these ideas about how your mind works without you having to wade through everything. We're hunting for those real aha moments.
Exactly. We'll be your guides, sort of pointing out the key landmarks in this mental landscape. Okay, so let's get into it.
One thing that struck me right away was how the authors, or some of them, talked about their collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, how they sort of deliberately challenged each other's gut feelings. They had different strengths, one more logical, one more intuitive.
Right, and they used that. They didn't just rely on their own first thoughts. They pushed each other to see, where the biases might be hiding.
Which is a great lesson in itself, isn't it? Getting different viewpoints is crucial, especially for understanding something as tricky as our own thinking.
Absolutely. And all that questioning led them to this, well, really influential idea, System 1 and System 2 thinking.
That's the framework. And it's super important to remember, like you said, these aren't actual places in your brain.
No, just useful labels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Labels for two different ways the mind operates. System 1 is the fast one. Automatic, intuitive, often emotional.
The gut reaction stuff.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And System 2, that's the slower, more deliberate, analytical part. The one that takes effort.
And System 1 is kind of always on, isn't it? Running in the background.
It is.
Yeah.
The Mueller-Lyer illusion is such a perfect example of that.
Ah, the lines with the arrowhead.
Right. You know the lines are the same length. Your System 2 knows it. But your System 1 just sees one as longer. You can't not see it that way.
So your intuition, your perception, just overrides the facts you know.
It shows how powerful and autonomous that System 1 can be. Our first take isn't always the right one, even when we feel sure.
Okay, so we've got fast System 1 and effortful System 2. Now, the sources also talked about cognitive ease and strain, how smoothly we process things.
Yes, and this is fascinating because the feeling of ease or difficulty actually changes how we think.
How so?
Well, cognitive ease, when things feel fluent, familiar, clear, easy to understand, it signals that things are probably okay. System 1 is happy, basically.
Makes sense. Things feel right.
But when you hit cognitive strain, something's complex, unfamiliar, maybe badly written, that feeling of difficulty tends to wake up System 2.
Ah, so the mental friction makes you slow down and think harder.
Exactly. It puts you on alert. You're more likely to be analytical, maybe a bit more skeptical when things feel difficult.
I remember reading about that experiment with the pencil in the mouth, making people smile or frown.
Oh, yeah. That shows the link, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The physical state affecting your mood and even how easily you process information. Frowning induced a bit more cognitive strain, made people slightly more analytical.
Wild. And it even affects how persuasive things are.
Totally. Like rhyming aphorisms often seem more insightful just because they rhyme. They're easier to process. They have that cognitive ease.
Ah, haste makes waste sounds wiser than moving quickly can lead to errors.
Precisely. Same with pronounceable names. If a source or a company name is easy to say, we tend to trust it a little more. System 1 likes things easy.
Our brains are lazy, basically, looking for shortcuts.
Well, efficient, maybe.
Yeah?
Which leads nicely into priming, another big topic in your sources.
Right. The idea that tiny, subtle things we're exposed to can influence us without us even noticing.
It really shows how much our environment is constantly nudging our thoughts and feelings, all beneath the surface.
That famous study about words related to being elderly.
Yes, where young participants who read those words actually walked more slowly down the hallway afterwards.
It's kind of creepy, isn't it?
It is a bit unsettling. Or the watching eyes experiment. Just putting a picture of eyes near an honesty box made people contribute more money.
Wow. So just the feeling of being watched, even by a poster.
Was enough to subtly change behavior. The big takeaway is we're suggestible in ways we just don't realize.
And this connects to judging truth, too, right? That feeling of familiarity.
Absolutely. If something feels familiar, maybe you've heard it before, maybe it was subtly primed, System 1 gives it a little check mark. It feels true-ish.
Especially if System 2 is busy or distracted.
Exactly. If your analytical mind isn't paying attention, that feeling of familiarity can easily be mistaken for actual truth. System 1 defaults to believing.
Okay, this all makes me wonder about intuition again. You hear about expert intuition, like firefighters or doctors making snap decisions. Is that just system one again?
That's a really important question. And the sources make a distinction. Expert intuition, like the kind Herbert Simon studied in Chess Masters.
You're right, they see the board differently.
They do. But it's not magic. It's pattern recognition, built up over thousands and thousands of hours of practice and feedback. Their system one has become incredibly skilled in that specific area.
So it's a trained intuition, not just a random gut feeling.
Precisely. But, and this is big, but the sources warn about illusions of skill. In environments that are really complex and unpredictable, like stock picking,
Yeah.
that feeling of intuitive certainty can be totally wrong. True expertise needs reliable, quick feedback, like you know immediately if you brake too hard driving.
But a stock pick, you might not know for ages if it was luck or skill.
Exactly. Or think of a harbor pilot navigating tricky waters versus, say, a political pundit making long-term forecasts. The feedback is very different. So intuition is powerful, but only in the right conditions.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's switch gears slightly to some of the specific biases the sources flagged. The availability heuristic sounds, well, very available in everyday life.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's simply that we judge how frequent or likely something is based on how easily examples pop into our heads.
So dramatic, vivid events stick in the mind.
Right. Things that get a lot of media coverage or things that happened recently or things that were emotionally intense, they come to mind easily, so we assume they're more common than they might statistically be.
Like worrying more about a plane crash than a car crash, even though statistically.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
You overestimate the dramatic, easily recalled risk. Then there's the representativeness heuristic.
That's judging by stereotypes, essentially.
Sort of, yeah. We assess the likelihood that something belongs to a category based on how much it resembles our mental picture of that category.
And we ignore the base rates, the actual statistics.
Often, yes. The classic example is Tom W. You get a description of someone who sounds exactly like your stereotype of, say, a computer science nerd.
Okay.
And you're asked if he's more likely to be in computer science or, say, humanities. Most people go for computer science, even if they know there are vastly more humanities students overall.
Because the description feels so representative, it overrides the statistics.
It's a powerful pull. We focus on the story, the description, not the underlying numbers.
Huh. And anchoring. That sounds like getting stuck on the first number you hear.
Pretty much. An initial piece of information, even if it's completely random, can powerfully sway your later judgments or estimates.
Like in a negotiation, the first offer sets the stage.
Absolutely. Or those experiments where they spin a wheel of fortune with numbers, then ask unrelated questions like, what percentage of African nations are in the UN? People's answers get pulled towards the random number they just saw.
How does that even work?
It seems to be partly about timing again. The anchor number activates related thoughts and concepts in your memory, making numbers closer to the anchor seem more plausible. Your mind adjusts from that starting point.
It's amazing how easily we're influenced. What about loss aversion? That feels very real.
Oh, it's hugely powerful. The basic idea is that losses loom larger than equivalent gains. Losing $100 feels much worse than gaining $100 feels good.
Definitely. You feel that pang of loss more intensely.
And this makes us biased towards the status quo. We don't want to risk losing what we have, even if we might gain something better. It affects everything from investment decisions to relationship choices sometimes.
Right. And prospect theory builds on this, the fourfold pattern. That sounds complicated.
It sounds more complex than it is. It basically describes how our attitude to risk changes depending on probabilities and whether we're looking at gains or losses.
Okay.
So, for gains, we tend to overweight small probabilities. Think lottery tickets, the tiny chance of a big win feels exciting. That's the possibility effect. But we underweight high probabilities. We prefer a sure gain over a slightly uncertain but potentially larger gain, certain to effect.
So we're risk-averse for likely gains, but risk-seeking for long-shot gains.
You got it. And for losses, it flips. We underweight small probabilities of loss. We tend to ignore small risks. But we overweight high probabilities of loss. A near certain loss feels terrible, so we might take a big gamble to avoid it entirely.
Meaning we become risk-seeking to avoid a probable loss. Wow.
It explains a lot of seemingly irrational choices around risk. And related to all this is framing.
How you word things changes the decision, even if the facts are the same.
Exactly. The classic surgery example. Telling patients there's a 90% survival rate sounds much better and leads to more people choosing it than saying there's a 10% mortality rate.
Even though it's the exact same outcome.
The frame changes the emotional response, and system 1 runs with that feeling.
Okay, shifting again. The planning fallacy. I feel like everyone who's ever managed a project knows this one intimately.
Oh, absolutely. It's that universal tendency to underestimate how long things will take and how much they'll cost.
We focus on the best case scenario, right? The inside view.
Exactly. We imagine everything going smoothly. We don't adequately consider all the things that could go wrong based on past experience or the experience of others. That's the outside view we often neglect.
And this is part of a bigger optimistic bias.
Yeah, generally, most people tend to see themselves and their future as brighter than average, and the world is a bit more benign than it might be.
Which can be good, right? Keeps us motivated.
It can be, especially for entrepreneurs, maybe. A dose of optimism helps you get started, but it can also lead to taking foolish risks or not preparing adequately. It's a real double-edged sword.
The sources mention something called a premortem to fight the planning fallacy. How does that work?
It's a neat trick. Before you start a project, the team imagines it's, say, a year later, and the project has completely failed. Utter disaster.
Okay, bit grim.
A bit. But then everyone individually writes down why it failed, what went wrong.
So you force yourselves to think about the potential problems before they happen.
Exactly. It legitimizes doubts and surfaces risks that might get glossed over in the initial optimistic planning phase. It forces that outside view perspective.
That sounds incredibly useful, actually.
Mm.
Okay, finally, this idea of the two selves, the remembering self and the experiencing self, that was really thought-provoking.
It's a profound distinction, I think. It suggests we live our lives moment by moment, that's the experiencing self, but the self that makes decisions and evaluates our lives is the remembering self.
And the remembering self doesn't just tally up all the moments, does it?
Not at all. It's heavily biased by the peaks, the most intense moments, and the end of an experience. The duration often gets ignored.
Peak, end rule, and duration neglect. I remember the cold hand experiment.
Right. People preferred repeating a longer trial that included the initial painful cold water plus a period of slightly less cold water at the end over just repeating the shorter, intensely painful trial.
Because the memory of the longer one was better, thanks to the less unpleasant ending, even though the total pain experience was greater.
Exactly. The remembering self preferred the experience that ended better, ignoring the extra duration of discomfort. Same finding with colonoscopies.
Wow, so we make choices based on anticipated memories, not necessarily anticipated experiences.
It certainly seems that way often, which has huge implications for how we think about happiness and well-being. Are we trying to maximize good moments or create good memories? They aren't always the same goal.
And the research on money and happiness ties into this.
It does. The findings suggest that while poverty definitely causes misery for the experiencing self, beyond a certain income level enough to meet basic needs and avoid constant worry, more money doesn't seem to buy much more moment-to-moment experienced happiness.
But the remembering self might still value getting richer.
Potentially, yes. And there's the focusing illusion, too. When you think about, say, moving to California for the weather, you focus on the weather's impact.
And overestimate how much it'll actually affect your overall happiness day to day.
Right, you adapt. Other things become more important. We tend to misjudge how much impact single factors will have on our long-term well-being because we focus on them when we think about them.
So pulling all these threads together, this has been a fascinating dive. It really paints a picture of our thinking as this constant back and forth between fast intuition and slower reason.
Absolutely. And recognizing that we rely on these mental shortcuts, these heuristics, and that they come with built-in biases, that's incredibly powerful.
Understanding these patterns, these illusions our minds create, seems like the first step to maybe navigating them a bit better.
Whether you're prepping for a meeting, trying to understand a complex issue, or just, trying to make better choices in your own life, being aware of how your mind works is key.
It definitely gives you a new lens to look through.
Which really brings us to the final thought for you, the listener. Given everything we've talked about, these pervasive biases, the two systems, the illusions, how can you actively use this knowledge?
Yeah, what specific things could you do consciously to maybe nudge your own thinking towards more rational, more beneficial outcomes day to day?
How can you maybe step back and engage system 2 more often or question that immediate gut feeling? Definitely something worth pondering further.